here?
Yeah, well, you can go up front if you'd like.
Trying to kind of, get back into like
Doesn't matter.
eat every day
Hi.
again and really get back into the mindset.
Welcome to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
John's gonna hold on back like he usually does.
Yeah, oh, yeah, he sneaks back there.
Did you want me up here or in the audience? Okay.
Here's fine.
We're on.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
We're going to start the workshops.
I deleted it.
It is July 17th, 2017. How summer is flying. It's nice to have this good weather. We're going to start with our city clerk on voting locations.
Do you have a preference if am I okay here? Okay, so as you all know, there have been more and more concerns about holding the elections, having the schools as our voting places. And I've received calls from a lot of parents of students expressing their concerns. You know, typically the schools are locked up and very secure throughout the year, except for on election days. So some of them actually opt to keep their kids home from school on election days. The school committee has also asked that we look into alternative locations. As you can see in your packet, I have the self-certification, accessibility self-certifications. So there's a lot that you have to really consider when you're looking for, you know, a voting place. So I think it's going to be challenging to find a different location in each of the districts, but I have come up with a couple of alternatives. One is the Hasty Community Center, which I think would be a good option for Ward 2 voters. And the second would be the Norway Savings Bank Arena, the mezzanine area. I think that would work well for Ward 1 voters. In doing the self-certification, each of them meet the requirements that are needed. And you know, as far as parking, there's plenty of parking at both locations, and they're newer, you know, it's newer asphalt, it's level. Hasty has done some renovations. They have a nice accessible entrance to the right of the building. Plenty of, you know, parking for people with disabilities. At some point, I think we may even want to consider, I wouldn't want to do it before this election because of the consolidation question, but at some point we may want to consider consolidating a couple of polling places. I think Hasty could easily accommodate at least 2 voting districts, and my thought would be wards 2 and 3. But that's, you know, we can discuss that at a later date. But right now, my concern is trying to find alternative locations so that we can try to get out of the schools. In order to change the voting location, you do need approval. I would need to submit the application to the Secretary of State's office 60 days before the election, and it does need council approval as well. Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Sure.
If you're going to have the voting place outside the ward, is that an additional hoop to jump through?
The voting location has to be in the district where it's located unless you're consolidating. So Hasty is actually in Ward 2, but if we were to consolidate, you know, that would be fine, assuming it you know, got council approval and approval from the Secretary of State's office. But I wouldn't be able to have Ward 3 voters vote at Hasty, just Ward 3 voters, because it's outside of the district, if that makes sense.
How about compensation? I mean, Hasties, we own it, right?
Yes.
The Norway,
Norway Savings Bank Arena, I wouldn't have to, they wouldn't charge me anything if I were using the mezzanine area. But if I were to use one of the sheets of ice, then they would have to charge me.
so we get a freebie. This is who you know.
I definitely would want to hear from Jason on the Norway Arena, because on November 7th, there could be a night where that place is packed with ice skating kids and stuff, so I would want to know what's going to happen, what he really thinks that you would have that whole day, and we'd have to set up at some time. There's really some problems there, so
Yeah.
I definitely would want to hear what is it going to affect? You know, is there a cost to what it is going to affect? Because you're not going to allow all them kids to run around upstairs, that's for sure, when people
Right.
are voting. So there'll be no concession, there'll be none of that going on at the time. So I would want to really see a lot more to that Norway Arena one than just,
And I did speak
Voting
to
on it.
Jason, and he seemed to be, you know, very receptive to the idea. And the mezzanine area, it's quite large. We wouldn't need the entire mezzanine area. We could use just a section of it.
well, maybe for voting, but people got to go up and down the elevator, they got to go up and down the stairs, so yeah, you're still going to use 90% of that upstairs. So there's no way around closing off half of it or a quarter of it. Because the elevator is for the handicap. That's also another job, just setting up. I mean, I used to set that stuff up. You got to bring all that stuff up the elevator and everything.
Yeah.
I truly don't think that's the right place for us to go.
Chair, so.
Want to go?
Sure. Sue, thanks for you know, starting to do some of the work on this. I recognize that you know, folks from the city or you know, the school members of the school committee have come to us with this concern. I guess my question is, I mean, we're one of several hundred municipalities in the state of Maine. I'm sure there are other cities that have, you know, either have their polling places within their schools or are grappling with the same issue. In your mind, are other cities also trying? I'm just trying to figure out if changing these polling locations is something that is a general trend across the state, or if problems have been identified, or if this is more of a proactive concern.
I think a lot of municipalities still vote in their schools. They still have schools as their polling places.
I guess you know, one thing that I'm concerned about, recognizing the potential safety concerns that having, you know, members of the general public in the schools creates. One of the benefits of having the polling locations within the schools is their centrality within the population centers within our city. It makes them incredibly accessible for those who are going to vote. You know, and I recognize that the city only has so many municipally owned buildings across the city or across the wards, but I'm reticent to change these locations if it means potentially disenfranchising or making it more difficult for people to vote. That's. I don't want to see us adding confusion to the voting process for our citizens.
I think I'm in a similar spot. 3 and 4 switched, 3 years ago? And even with the special election this year, there was at least dozens of a small group of people who actually voted in this year's election. There were dozens who came here and were actually supposed to be out at Fairview. And voter confusion is a harm that we shouldn't take lightly. And so that's why, for me, I'm sort of in a place of evaluating two competing harms. The risk or the concerns that parents are having about people voting in the schools versus the potential for voter confusion. And so, given that, I'd kind of like to get a little more sense of what the concerns we're hearing from parents are. What are the natures of those concerns?
Anyone else? Councilor Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I feel kind of the same way. I'd like to know specifically if there are any dangers that have been identified, or is it simply a lot of potential, but what the specific problems that have occurred. And then I'm also a believer, and although I am very conservative, as people know, when it comes to the right to vote, I would be willing to spend more money for security or whatever it takes to keep the polling places convenient, as opposed to moving them to some far-out place for safety when there may have been another option. Now, I don't know if you can do that in the schools, whether you can cordon off a place and you can have, for that day, extra police there that are just making sure nobody leaves. They come and go where they're supposed to and don't wander, and all the things we need to do. Would parents feel better knowing there was extra security there during voting? And it's unfortunate that we have to do that, but I would rather do that or look at that before we make broad changes. And combining Ward 3 and 4, I think, would be a real problem for my ward, where it just changed not too long ago to Fairview, and now it's going to be combined with another. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. But I also understand the safety aspect, so I wish we could go down the road and find out, is there a way that during election days we can make those areas more secure so that the children and the parents feel comfortable knowing there isn't people wandering around where they shouldn't.
What else? Councilor Pross?
I want to apologize to the city manager and my fellow city councilors for being a few minutes late. This issue came before the school committee. I believe it was brought to the city by the school committee when there was some initial concern during last year's election season, which was especially acrimonious, I think we'd all agree, regarding the safety of the polling places, as we've discussed here. But there was not it wasn't as if there was a group of parents who came up one night and said, this is a really big issue. It came up in the context of discourse about whether or not we should be concerned about safety in the schools, and that's certainly a valid concern. I pushed back a little bit, expressing some of the concerns that my fellow councilors have expressed here regarding access to the polling places, and also reminded my fellow committee members that there have not been any incidences. After the polling was done, I believe it was one of my fellow school committee members, committee member Hayes, said that the door leading into the actual school facility was unlocked, and I guess the standard procedure is that it's supposed to be the general public doesn't have access, they could not get through those doors, and she had pointed out that that was not the case. Nothing happened. There was no tragedy. Obviously, our community prepares for those incidences. We've had briefings on exercises between our city police department and also with the school department and its staff and personnel working together to make sure that we're prepared for any such occurrence. But it really was just kind of brought up, I think, in the context of last year's election, which again was especially difficult and acrimonious and bitter. And those are important concerns for us to keep to the front of our minds as policymakers, but I don't know that the need to change locations is necessary at this time, given those safety concerns.
Anyone else?
I guess I have a question for Councilor Pross, just in the context of the conversations that did transpire within the school committee. Was anything discussed at the school committee level in terms of potentially making that day a workshop day, or, you know, if the issue is that students and voters are in the school at the same time, was there any discussion around how the schedule looks, or was it simply a conversation about changing locations?
Public minutes will certainly reflect that better than my own memory would serve, but I do seem to recall that that was part of the discussion. Changing workshop days, as I understand it, does require some flexibility from the state, special requests, so that may have been one of the reasons why that idea, if it was floated, wasn't really seen as a possibility. I think that the school committee was right to think about these concerns. They're obviously very concerned about the welfare of the children in our schools, but I think they wanted the city council to really have an opportunity to hear maybe from the chief of police about these types of concerns. What are we doing to make sure that the schools are safe on election day, so that we as policymakers that would make this type of change would have an informed decision whichever way we decided to go.
Thank you, Council. And I guess that was my second question, was whether or not, I see Chief Kroll is in the audience, and whether or not he had anything that he wanted to add to this conversation, or an assessment of the polling locations.
While he's coming up, did the school committee provide a recommendation in giving this to us, or they said it's our decision, obviously, because we're the policy?
I think that they realized that it was our decision, but it seemed that the majority was very interested in having this, a workshop that addressed the issue.
Chief,
Thanks.
thank you for being here.
All right. Mr. Manager and Council, so we do have officers assigned to the schools currently. So any of the polling locations where the school is at, we work with them. We actually have a lot of resources that are allocated on Election Day. They're checking polling locations. They're communicating closely with, our ward clerks and with Sue during that entire process. Certainly the superintendent and I had conversations leading up to some of these discussions last year. She made the decision, I think, to allow students, parents to make the decision whether or not they wanted to send their child to school was going to be a choice. I think it's, my biggest concern, I guess, with some of the schools is more just about transitioning, especially in those early mornings. You've got parents coming in, drop-offs, people coming in to vote. It's really more of a congestion issue for me that we see and we try to work on. Safety-wise, like I said, we're patrolling those locations on a regular basis. I'm not an alarmist. I'm not too concerned when I feel like we have good staffing that are located on there. What we can do is, if the council would like, we can take a look at how some of our past, especially this last one, I know we did an after-action report on this last voting election day. We can take a look, see what some of the concerns were, the feedback. Some of it is that ensuring that we're blocking some of the corridors that are leading into the general population of the school, ensuring that there's someone there. And I believe we didn't, I knew about the door. I think there was a door that was left open, but other than that, I don't think we really had any other issues at the schools. But we can step up that security. So whatever the will of the council is, we can make work on that and ensure that it's a safe location the best we can.
Council Pross?
Chief, if it was the determination of the council that it was a safer plan, a better idea to have some polling locations consolidated or do something else besides what we have right now, would that create a significant amount of work on the part of your department to redevelop plans that would be specific to emergency situations that may arise at those polling places and not just at the schools? Would that be a sort of a separate project that you'd have to undertake?
I think as long as we, and I would imagine there's going to be proper notification for the public to know where their location will be, as long as we have good, proper notification, because we have to do a lot of measurements because of signage, where people can put signs, where can candidates stand, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of measurements that we take to ensure that area is well determined. We have those already built in for every polling location currently. So, I mean, if it was to change, I think by the time you make that decision, that gives us more than 60 days to be able to ensure that. So I don't see any concern. Once you make the decision, we can then implement a security plan for that new location.
Yes, Council Burns?
So I would certainly be interested in any information or data collection that the police department has undertaken or plans to undertake to ensure that what we are doing at the schools in terms of having them as polling locations is as safe as possible, and what the if there are ways that security can be improved. I think it sounds like I'm not the only counselor who might be interested in knowing whether or not those steps are if there are steps that should be undertaken or can be undertaken. But I guess I would continue to be skeptical of the alternatives when it comes to finding alternate polling locations that aren't based at the schools. I think I want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to ensure that those polling locations are safe and secure. But I also want to make sure that those locations are accessible to the members of the public who are going to be voting.
Anyone else? Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
Sue, do you have any comments at this point?
Nope, not at this point.
Well, thank you very much, members of the council. This is very informative. We'll come back to you with a report on where we're at on this issue. Eric, are you ready for the next workshop on food sovereignty?
Good evening, Mr. Manager and City Council. Recently, there was an act to recognize local control regarding food systems signed into law just about a month ago. And prior to that, there's been a number of towns that have sort of staked out their political positions about food sovereignty by adopting ordinances. Those ordinances were intended really to allow what is now allowed by law when we do adopt an ordinance, but they were usually followed by a letter from the state saying it's great that you've taken that position, but you should inform your farms that they're still subject to USDA inspection for processing animals and still subject to food licensing and kitchen inspections for processing fruits and vegetables. This new law actually allows those towns that have already adopted an ordinance and additional towns to decide for themselves if they want to allow people that produce food within their municipal boundaries to be able to process it and sell it directly to consumers without having the inspections that are required of foods currently. You would still have to have an inspected facility for any foods that are going to be sold to a retailer that to then be resold to the public, or any foods that are going to be brought outside of the municipal boundaries and sold to a consumer. This law would only allow for food produced in Auburn to be processed in Auburn and sold directly to a consumer in Auburn. So really it would encourage farmers to, they would have a new outlet to local customers. It would encourage people and farmers to get to know each other and decide for themselves if they're comfortable buying food through a different path than has traditionally been available. There would still be USDA inspected meats in grocery stores, in any retail store that has to buy products for resale. And all of the current options for buying food that's inspected the way that it is today would remain intact. And people would just have this one additional choice to buy food directly from a farmer if they trusted them and felt that they wanted to do that. I've heard from a number of small farmers over the years that gaining access to a USDA inspected facility is a major hurdle to them being competitive in the market of actually selling food. It's expensive, but it's also the time of year when a lot of animals already are pretty consistent across the board. A lot of people will get pigs in the spring, and they're all ready for slaughter in the fall. And even if you're willing to pay the price for slaughtering at one of those facilities, it can be months before you can get an appointment. Even heard from some that bring their beef or pork animals to Pennsylvania to be slaughtered and then truck them back to Maine to be sold as Maine products. So I think it really is an opportunity for smaller farms to have a niche market to sell food within their community to people that they know. We've heard from a number of farmers that this could be very good for small farms in Auburn. Obviously, when food is not inspected, if it's not processed properly, that might be less likely to be picked up on. So there could be some additional risk of somebody being sick if people don't take it seriously. But farmers in general, the ones that I've spoken to, sound like they recognize that. That is a liability, and they would be very careful about not making their consumers sick. So I think this would be a good option, I think, if we want to promote small farms and agriculture in Auburn. And we're looking to hear from you about whether or not you'd like to consider this for Auburn. I think a number of communities will consider it. There's a model ordinance that seems to have started with the first adoption in Blue Hill, included in your packet, that stakes it uses a lot more space in the ordinance to sort of stake out their political positions than it does to just accomplish what can be accomplished under the law. And there's also a model that Councilor Lee was nice enough to draft for you that really pares down what is said in the ordinance to what has to be said to allow for this flexibility to exist in Auburn. So we'd be curious what your thoughts are about this. Thank you.
Any questions? Council members? Comments? Councilor Stone?
It sounds like a great idea.
Mike,
You're not Mike,
Mike.
Council.
Mike.
Sorry. Sounds like a great idea. I think it'll really help our smaller farmers, and I think it's something that is well worth us looking at very carefully. My only question is liability to the city. And let's say if somebody doesn't process properly, there's a problem, somebody gets sick, could they come after the city saying we didn't have we opened the door to the problem, and that we wouldn't have had the problem if we wouldn't have allowed to sell. So that would be my only question.
I don't believe it would give the city any liability, but that's something we can explore as part of looking into it.
I'd want to make sure we're on the safe side on that.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Titus?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Manager. I would have a couple of concerns here. I like the idea of less regulation. I've always like that. But my concern is there that it needs to be regulated. That is to make sure that farms or farmers are selling, if they're doing both, if both retail and like a by the side of the road farm stand, that we know that they're not taking advantage of the exemption to do everything like that. So we'd have to have some sort, I would assume, sort of a process to monitor that. If we don't, then the ordinance has nothing to it if we can't monitor it. And my other concern too would be is if we just abandon USDA regulations and had nothing in place to replace it, would we be in trouble there? And if we put something in place to replace it, are we doing anything better? And I'd want to see that ordinance that would be written that would be beneficial for the farmer, and not just replace one regulation with another regulation that's just as ominous or just as much inspections or whatever. So I guess I'm not sure what the intent of this is. The state saying we don't need to inspect food that's sold directly from a farm to an individual. And if that's what they're saying,
correct.
then maybe the state regulation would be our bailout if something happened. We say, well, no, the state said they could do this, as long as we could prove that we were monitoring the fact that farmers would, this product was going to an individual and not to a restaurant. How do we know that?
The restaurants would still be required to buy food through the normal inspection process, because that would be a wholesale sale. But this would, the state law now allows, when this goes into effect, a community to decide for themselves whether or not they want to exempt their local farmers for direct farm-to-consumer sales. So we're not suggesting, if we choose this as a policy direction, and I think it could be beneficial to a lot of small farms, we're not suggesting a new ordinance to replace what's there now. It would be up to the farmer to do things properly, and up to the consumer to only choose to buy from their local farmer if they're comfortable.
Buyer beware, you mean, type thing? My concern, I used to talk to some farmers too, and we have at least one in the audience that I hope maybe at open session he'll have a comment, but my concern too is it beneficial? If you're only going to produce products and sell to an individual, is that something that's really profitable for a farm? Can a farm sustain that kind of thing, or is this going to be the person who has a backyard and a large enough area to grow enough corn to sell it by the side of the road, and then they're not exempt? I mean, they're exempt from any of the regulations, which does that put that at an unfair advantage to the farmer who has to follow all the regulations? So I guess there's a lot of questions that I'd like to see answered. I like the idea of less regulation, but I just hope we're not, get a lot of unintended consequences here.
I would suspect that for most farmers, it would just be one new piece of their business, that they would still, if they sell to wholesale markets now, still continue to do that, but maybe they could grow a few more birds to sell to their neighbors or somebody they know or somebody that's willing to buy them through that process. And vegetables like corn, any vegetable for that matter, you can buy those without being inspected now, as long as they're not processed. If you take raspberries and make jam, then that becomes a processed product that has to be inspected. But the raw fruits and vegetables are uninspected now, and any of us could sell those beside the road.
Other questions, comments? Council Burns?
Thank you. I support the food sovereignty law that was passed. That's why I co-signed the request to get this on the workshop schedule so that we could start the process of discussing how this would play out in Auburn. I trust our farmers, and I want to see them have every opportunity to contribute to our local food system. My only concern is making sure that if we do allow our local farmers to sell uninspected processed goods to our citizens within the city, that the consumer is aware that the product that they're buying has not been inspected in that way. I think I trust that our farmers will not ever, through willful negligence or malintent, try to hurt their neighbors. But I also want to make sure that the consumers who would be buying these goods are fully aware of what they're buying. And I think if the city of Auburn is able to facilitate the creation of a market in which both the buyer and seller are fully aware of what the goods that they're transacting, I think we'll have a good system. That's my biggest concern, is making sure that the information is fully shared, so that our consumers know the choice that they're making.
Council Lee?
So I trust our farmers, but I think I also trust our consumers to some degree, and I think that's part of the idea of building a local food system, is in which you can have a direct interaction between the processor and the person who's purchasing the food, and that's somewhat the concept that I think the legislature was enacting by enacting this statute. The reason I've drafted the ordinance in this way is to somewhat solve some of Councilor Titus's concerns. What this does is basically say, we will unregulate this type of transaction to the extent that the state statute or the federal law permits us. So basically, we don't have to keep coming back and changing if the case law on this changes or if the statute changes. We're coextensive with what the statute has enacted. So that was the intent of doing it this way rather than, say, using the Blue Hill model.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Burns?
I would just, I generally agree with Councilor Lee in terms of, trust for, our farmers and also trust for the consumer. But that said, I think with this being a new paradigm, up till this point, consumers have not been used to having the option of purchasing from an unregulated market. My biggest concern would be that without some sort of education, our consumers would not be fully aware, because everyone is used to having every processed food that they purchase has gone through some specific inspection regime, and that may be very onerous and unnecessary within our local system, but I also would want to ensure that our consumers are aware that that system has changed. And that would continue to be my biggest concern. And I think it's easy enough to include that language within a local ordinance, in addition to the language that's been drafted, giving us the maximum flexibility, but including language that would specify that our consumers need to be made aware.
Other comments? Councilor Ross?
Yeah, thank you. I think that this really represents an exciting opportunity for the city of Auburn. I mean, this is one step that we can take that really is coming at a perfect time. We've just dedicated resources to an ag zone study. We are pretty well steeped in conversation and dialogue about the extent of those resources in our city limits. I think that there is a really strong appetite and market out there for locally grown foods. And if that's the case, anything that we can do to keep local food dollars feeding local businesses, keeping that money in the community is a positive step forward. There are, of course, going to be some safety concerns, but I think we have to be willing to really evaluate those with an open mind and hopefully with an eye toward moving something like this forward.
Other questions, comments? Eric, anything more you want to add?
That's it from my point of view.
So what would be the next step for us as we move forward in this process?
If there's interest, and it sounds like there is, we would take your comments and try to prepare a draft for a public hearing that you could consider at a later meeting.
Does that sound acceptable?
I think if we had something from legal that just kind of said, we looked at this ordinance, here's what we think, that might address Councilor Stone's concerns about liability for the city and some of those other concerns that were raised, that would be a good step forward.
Agreed.
Make it so.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Eric. Mr. Chamings and Mr. Cousins, you ready for the next workshop?
Good evening, Mr. Manager and council members. We're here tonight to talk about the recreational plan use development ordinance reconsideration. We've had a discussion once in executive session because we had a project-driven recommendation for ordinance change. Eric had spent a lot of time working on this in the past few years, and it kind of got tabled. So I'm going to let Eric do a brief overview of the history of this and then why we're looking at moving this forward at this time.
Thank you. The concept of allowing either residential or commercial uses adjacent to our recreational facilities has been talked about since before the current comp plan that was adopted in 2010, and then was talked about at length during the creation of the current comp plan by the Comprehensive Plan Committee, the Planning Board, and then in the end by the City Council. It's pretty common throughout the state, throughout the country, and throughout the world to see lodging accommodations at ski mountains or golf courses, and currently in Auburn, or single-family homes even at some of those resources. Currently in Auburn, we have some of those facilities that are located in the agricultural zone. Hotels or housing are not allowed in that zone. And we have a couple of those facilities located in residential zones where housing is fine, but hotels are currently not allowed, and some other common commercial uses that you might see adjacent to a recreational use. In 2011 and 12, shortly after the adoption of our comp plan, we had a potential project at Martindale Country Club, and that started a discussion about allowing for hotels that led to the current draft of the recreational plan unit development that would allow for that to happen, but it would go a bit further and allow for residential uses adjacent to Lost Valley or a golf course, even if it's not in a residential zone. There was some opposition to that, mostly based on traffic and really specific to that project, that neighborhood. And after a lengthy public discussion, unanimous planning board recommendation for the current draft of the ordinance, the council chose to table that and not act on it at that time. We now have another opportunity at a golf course here in Auburn, Prospect Hill, for some commercial development, accommodations for people to stay at that golf course, and the discussion I think really needs to be considered again. If we want to see these development opportunities in Auburn and the new value they can create and the new visitors that they would allow to stay here to enjoy some of those recreational uses, we have to have some flexibility added to our ordinances to accommodate that. We missed out on the previous project partially by not adopting the ordinance. I can't say for sure if it would have happened if we had adopted it at that time, but we have a very strong possibility of a new project tied to a recreational use if the council's open to reopening this discussion. And our suggestion would be not to just reopen and act on it in the same night, which you could do because they've had the public hearings. Our suggestion would be to reopen it and direct staff to schedule a public hearing and then get some input from the public and then choose whether or not to act on it. This has been discussed for such a long time, even since before the current comprehensive plan, and I think it is an important flexibility if we want to see recreational uses survive in Auburn. There are a number of them that struggle financially. Lost Valley, as an example, changed hands recently because of financial struggles, and these types of additional income sources are really critical and pretty common at other facilities if we want to preserve those assets. So we're asking tonight if the council would be open to scheduling this for a public hearing so we can get some additional public input and see if we can move forward.
Questions, comments? Councilor Frost?
I hope that we will move this forward in the manner that you suggested. I think that this issue is, again, ripe for us to strike at. I look at the budgetary impacts and it's only upside. Increased investment and valuation for the total value of our city. I mean, that's what we're looking for here. I'm hearing a really strong endorsement from staff that's been living with these constraints for so many years, trying to do the work that they're doing to benefit our city and to broaden our tax base. I don't want us to continue to miss out on opportunities to bring investors in and to send the message that we're open for economic investment. I have a lot of faith in our planning board and in the planning process. We have an excellent process. The people involved in the planning board are dedicated and experienced, and of course staff, I have a lot of faith in them as well. Any of the issues that local residents may have or trepidations and concerns, I trust that they can be vetted through that process and addressed with good plans, better plans maybe than what might initially be laid on the table, but that's a part of the process. I don't think we should stand in the way.
Councilor Lee?
I'm generally inclined to be supportive of the ordinance change, and I think I do generally agree with what Councilor Pross is saying, but as a matter of process, it seems to me that we want to have as much public input as to this as possible, given that it was acrimonious when it first came up, and before jumping to it, I think as Eric suggested, we don't want to just do it on the same night. We want to give a little bit more public process than we might otherwise, so as to hear the public's concerns to any ordinance changes. So I would be supportive of moving this forward, but hesitant to do it very quickly and to give as much process as we can to it.
Other questions, comments? Yes, Councilor Titus?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. My concerns on this one is that it sounds good, sounds easy, but in looking through the documents here, I see this particular project could have other ramifications other than just traffic. Could be facilities such as sewer and water lines and stuff like that, and people being forced to have to hook into a line that's going by because it was going to support a new development, which definitely affects everybody in the neighborhood, not just from the traffic standpoint, but economically as well. So, I mean, I'm a little bit nervous about anything that's going to be done quickly, as I think I agree with, definitely move slowly. Doesn't make sense. The project that is listed here didn't make sense for the people in the neighborhood, and I still am a strong believer that the neighborhood is the ones that they have to protect the neighborhood. They have the right to protect their neighborhood. And so if there's a good case not to do it here, then it's not going to happen, I think. But it needs that hearing. So I'm not sure this is kind of a generalized ordinance change. It would be a citywide change if it's not specific to this one project. This is kind of a citywide, allow the planning board to make decisions to make these major changes.
It would be citywide.
So that's a little bit disturbing to me too, because how much input would the council have after that to say yea or nay to future projects if it's already written in ordinance? So
as it exists now, there are 4 facilities that meet the definition of a major recreational use, 3 golf courses and 1 ski area. So it is citywide, but it would be limited to those 4 facilities unless somebody else built one that met the definition.
Yeah, now do we take this one project and come up with a defined permission type ordinance or recommendation of the planning board like we've done before, and we say, okay, in this particular case, there isn't any real problems with the neighborhood, the neighbors, the congestion, the facilities. Let's move forward with this. But I'm a little bit nervous about a citywide ordinance change this large?
Well, I think it's only fair to look at it citywide, so they all fall into that, but the criteria that we put into place into this ordinance, they may not all meet that because of the public services or impact on road counts and such like that. But I think as far as being fair and equitable to the business owners, because as you know, seasonal businesses are being tougher and tougher to run, and to add value to that, that we would want to look at the city as a whole, and those 4 areas have equal access to that ordinance at this time. We did, like Eric brought up before, we did an excellent job summarizing this. They put a lot of work into it, but we felt that that was our recommendation: bring it back, bring this ordinance out to the current board, planning board, get the input, and then move forward with the public hearing with the other concerns to see if there's more concerns that we need to address and where it was left off.
Well, I personally wouldn't vote for this unless I knew there was protections for the neighborhood, and they had their say, and we weren't writing an ordinance that was going to allow something to happen that the boat's sailing, you can't get back on it, it's gone.
Councilor Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I support many of the arguments that Councilor Pross has made. I think what this does is allow us to take what essentially is a 6-month recreational facility that has really a useful life of 6 months. You know, you can't play golf when it snows, and you can't ski on days like this, but it allows us to do something that's done all over the United States, done all over the world. It's done in some of the swankiest neighborhoods in the nation. I'm thinking about Pebble Beach, which has residential units right up along the fairways overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I'm thinking of places like Sugarloaf. I'm thinking of places like Sunday River. I'm thinking about numerous golf courses down in southern Maine where they are lined with very expensive residential properties. One of the issues that we senior citizens have is in this area is a lack of good condo developments along golf courses. You know, that can be a very attractive item for people who winter in the Southland and then are looking for a place to live when they come back north in the summer for the golf season. So I can envision, and I think you will see, condominium developments along the fairways of courses, and it will be great for taxable valuation, which is a major issue that we all are wrestling with. And, you know, so even Augusta Country Club has got condos right along the fairway up there, and you wouldn't even know that they're there if you were looking, if you weren't looking for them. So I think this is a great step forward for the city, and I fully would expect that we would provide plenty of time for public input and have the public come in and talk about it and give us, their opinion on the thing. But on the other hand, when you get into some of these neighborhoods that are right now maybe on the outer edge of the city, and then you have other developments that are happening further out, sometimes they're in between. And it's a problem, no question about it. But I think we can be creative and perhaps help solve some of those problems as we encounter them. But I think this would really maximize the use of those facilities for the consumer, and it would also maximize the value of those recreational facilities for the owners. So it's a win-win.
Councilor Young.
The fact about the sewer and the water not being extended down South Main Street, there are residents in that area, buildings that already exist, that are in badly need of a sewer hookup and can't be sold or haven't been sold or because of that. So development in that area of some sort of a residential hotel or whatever would be a good thing to the people that already live there. It would solve some problems. But what I would like to be assured is that just because the zoning allows it, that doesn't mean it necessarily goes in, because there are a lot of different hoops that it has to jump through. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So as long as it has a review and the public has the input, we want a good partnership of the neighborhood being supportive of any change in development in the area. It would be traffic counts or whatever, all these types of things that they might be objecting to, or problems that arises.
There's quite a bit of criteria that's put into place. Obviously, there's quite a few concerns back when they did this, and it looked like the planning board spent quite a bit of time working on that and taking these concerns in and addressing it in where it sits right now. So I think the current ordinance that was proposed isn't that far out of whack. That's a pretty good job if you had a chance to read through it all. But there's criteria that's going to be set that each one would have to meet, and the public services are one of them. A lot of these areas, like down that area, if you're worried about traffic counts, I'm guessing if they built out where they're allowed to now on that acreage, they would have a higher traffic count than a motel or hotel would cause.
Thank you.
Council Lee?
I just wanted to clarify, I think I know the answer to this question, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. What's presently pending in front of us as a workshop item is a change to the ordinance, not any particular project, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Our motivation in the timing of it is because we have a potential project, but there's a lot of other reasons why this makes sense for the city.
I agree with everything that's been said here. I think we need to move forward with this, and it's going to really open the city up for the tourists that we're talking about, recreation. This is a win-win for the city of Auburn. The taxpayers there will win if this whole thing becomes a development that works, and there's no way to lose. We need to move forward in this city, and this is a way to do it.
Anyone else? Council Burns?
Yeah, I mean, I would just basically ditto all of that. You know, there are obviously a lot of different stakeholders when we talk about changing our zoning regulations. So certainly, I think this is an issue that's important enough that the council ought to take it up. But I would just agree with the general sentiment that we want to give a maximum opportunity for public input as well. So that would be my strongest preference is that the council does move ahead to put this on an agenda, but certainly having as much opportunity as possible for the public to give their input and be involved as we debate whether or not we want to move forward with this.
Anyone else? Michael, Eric, anything else you want to add?
No, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is just a few comments regarding the draft work plan. The city hasn't had a work plan for a while, as I understand it, an annual work plan that staff can work on in collaboration with the mayor and the council. And I have made a commitment to do that with the support of the department directors and the city team. And I have recommended, as you know, to bring in Craig Freshley to do a session with the department directors to work with us. This is a very important project for the city to develop a work plan that we can then use to not only accomplish projects and initiatives that have not been achieved at this point, but also to develop a work plan with prioritization plan on the budget that has been recently approved, so that after the meeting with the department directors, we'd then meet with the mayor and the council collectively to outline and develop and finalize what that work plan looks like, so that we can, as we move forward with our monthly council initiatives, also have updates for you on the work plan moving forward. I think this is something that every member of the council, as well as the mayor, have talked to me about at one point or another. And I think it's an investment that is necessary and important and would be very beneficial. Happy to answer any questions that you might have about it. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. I just had a couple of questions. So this is going to be staff that's going to do this with Mr. Freshley?
Yes, that's correct.
So now they have enough based on the input from council or just from the budget to put together enough and prioritize? Is that what you plan to do, is prioritize at this meeting and then come to us with your priorities?
What we'll do is we'll have a discussion among the department directors on the council initiatives that you're aware of, that we do monthly reports on, and other initiatives that may not be captured in that monthly report. We'll talk about them. We want to make sure that all the department directors have an opportunity to be able to provide the input so that we haven't missed anything. And we will try to put together a draft for the mayor and the council to be able to review with recommendations on prioritization. You will have the final say on approving the prioritization of those different goals and objectives as part of the work plan.
So I would just like to see, make sure that maybe we have a copy of what's going to be discussed before that meeting, that workshop you're talking about.
Yes.
And then make sure that if something's been missed or something that a council says, wait a minute, I thought this is supposed to be on the agenda or supposed to be in our list of priorities, to make sure that nothing's missed if we're going to spend the money to do this and have because I really believe this can work as long as we have the right data coming in, the right data will come out.
I think
my
that's
perspective, not after the fact.
Right. No, this is a very collaborative effort. We want to have you involved in this process. Along with this work plan, at the last meeting, I spoke about if there are any workshops, workshop topics that you'd like to have included in the future on council meetings, please let me know. Now that we have our new Assistant City Manager, Denise Clavette, on board, we are going to be moving forward, trying to develop some of these plans that we've been discussing. Really appreciate the work that John Boubier has been doing and all the heavy lifting that he did in terms of the budget process with Jill Eastman and the other work that he has been involved in. And look forward to having Denise on board, working with John for a period of time to help us move forward and come back to you with, as Councilor Titus said, come back to you with comments on what we're doing with Craig Freshley and this draft work plan. Other comments or questions? Yes, Councilor Lee?
It's two different workshops, right? The
Yes.
workshop with the department directors and you and Craig Freshley, and then the second workshop is with Craig Freshley, the mayor, the council, and the department directors.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. Councilor Burns?
I would just comment, I'm glad that we're talking about undertaking this. I think the development of a comprehensive work plan is essential to our city if we want to be strategic with how we're engaging. So, it's one of those, I wish it's something that we had always done, but I'm glad certainly that we're doing it now. So I'm excited to see it move forward.
Anyone else? Thank you very much. The next item is an update on where we are with the consolidation public hearing. Sue, do you want to make some comments on what we've been doing? Sue and I went out and did a tour of Central Maine Community College. After the last council meeting, there was direction to work collaboratively with the Joint Charter Commission and also with the City of Lewiston. I've met with representative of the Joint Charter Commission and talked with both Ed Barrett and Chip about the process, the meeting that we had, Sue and I, at Central Maine Community College with the president of the community college, Scott Knapp, and also David Gagne. Was very helpful. We got a tour of the auditorium, and the auditorium can hold up to 220 people. The recommendation is to hold this hearing on July 31st, and have it be at 6:30 PM. If that's agreeable to the council, I think that's along the lines of what we were talking about at the last discussion that we had. My sense was, and I think you'll agree, that you wanted to move ahead as quickly as possible to try and schedule a hearing. I think the city of Lewiston is looking at having their hearing based on the conversations that I had with Chip Morrison and Ed Barrett, the middle to the end of August. So our hearing would be July 31st. And we obviously will tape this and have the tape available on public access. Sue, anything else that you want to add?
I just want to note that the timeline that's in your packet, it says 6 o'clock, but we've since changed that to 6:30, so. And I believe your packets say July 31st. Okay.
Any questions or comments? Councilor Stone?
The advance notification period is what, 10 days?
Yes, it is.
So
Yep.
when would we vote on scheduling this hearing?
Well, we actually, go ahead, Sue, if you want to comment on that.
I don't believe that you have to vote on it. We would place the ad July 20th, so that's, I believe, a little more than 10 days.
Okay, so because we don't have another meeting after tonight, right?
Correct.
So I just want to make sure we meet that 10-day advance notice
That's going to be,
requirement.
that meeting's going to be here or at CMCC?
The hearing will be at Central Maine Community College
6:30
at 6:30
on
on
Monday,
July
the
31st.
And that'll be well advertised, I would assume, too. And
Yes.
E-alerts would go out and it'd be really like super broadcasted,
Right.
because this is vitally important to everybody.
I'm worried about the overflow.
Yeah.
That's the only thing I'm worried about up there. 220, if that's all that fits in that room, if we end up with 320, what are we going to do? Can we move into the gym if that became a problem?
We talked about that as a backup plan. The gym could hold up to 900 people. The problem with the gymnasium, as we all know, is it doesn't take very many people for it to get warm. There's no air-conditioned system there. There is in the auditorium. In talking with Chip Morrison about it, I think Chip said that there were probably, at the meeting that the Joint Charter Commission had in the auditorium, about 3/4 of the room was full. So I don't know if that's a good barometer for what would happen with this public hearing or not. He seemed comfortable with that location.
I'm only asking. I think we should have a backup plan.
Well, I think the backup plan would be the gymnasium, and we would make whatever preparations we can. We'd have to have some fans. And, I expect if we go in the gymnasium, it's probably going to get warm, and we'll do the best we can with it.
Sounds great. Warm won't hurt anybody. Cold will.
Any other questions, comments, concerns?
I echo Councilor Walker's concerns. I think this is going to be well attended. And, it would be tragic if we have to turn people away.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think we should plan on having the hearing in the gymnasium to begin with and not use that as a backup? Or
No.
go with the auditorium and the gymnasium as a
Yeah.
backup plan?
I would just ask them to be ready in case we had to move. I think the auditorium is the best one, but I really think we're going to fill it.
Yeah. I'm really concerned about that. I just don't want to have to turn anybody away.
Is there another venue that you think would be better?
I like the auditorium very much. It's comfortable. The audio visuals are good. And it's great. I just don't know what we do with overflow.
Yes, Councilor Titus.
What is the agenda for this? Is they going to be brought to us beforehand? I mean, what the agenda for the public hearing is?
Well, as I understand it, this will be a public hearing like we have here. Anyone will be able to make comments, probably, in talking with the mayor. I think we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes for each person to be able to speak, maybe 3 minutes. thinking that there might be a large number of people that have something that they want to say. And there will be microphones set up, people will be able to speak, and all of you will be there on the stage with the mayor. The mayor will convene it, and he will be chairing that hearing, and we will be there until it's over.
Yeah, because I guess what I want to know what this is, to me, this is a very public decision. It's obviously going to be a vote. The public is going to make their vote regardless of what we do. Are we going to have to vote to move it forward as a council? It happens anyway, right? It's on the vote. So, I mean, if we have it kind of in a format like we've had with budgetary hearings where they're trying to convince us to do something different as opposed to a discussion that everybody in the room can learn from and participate in, I'm hoping that's the kind of thing it's going to be, because to convince us, anybody up here, yay or nay, is not going to really make a difference. What's going to make a difference is how the people feel themselves. So I guess I'm wondering what the agenda or the format will be, and would like to have it as a town hall type thing where we're not getting up there and the council's up there being, not attacked, but being lectured to, because we don't make the decision. We've already made the decision that it's going to referendum. It's going. It's the people that are going to decide. So I guess I'd want to know how the format's going to be. I want everybody to have a chance to speak, but I guess, is it going to be intimidating where a person's got to get up and speak before council and mayor and try to convince us of something, or?
I would say that, again, we're being required to do this under state law. The city of Lewiston is going to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. And
we should.
It's an opportunity for people to be able to make statements regarding the vote. Councilor Young.
Obviously, it's an opportunity for people to talk in favor or against the consolidation, but there is also an opportunity for people to make changes in the proposal too as well, isn't it?
I think so. Do you see that as being?
I think it's an opportunity to voice their opinions on whatever way they want it to go or how they feel. And I think it's our job to sit there and listen. The mayor will, will do whatever he needs to do. And I'm going to guess we're going to have a couple policemen there. And if he goes overboard, they'll have to throw him out. Simple as that.
Well, I was under the impression it was the last chance that if anybody had any objections for one particular part of the proposal, if they wanted some wording or whatever to make it more saleable.
I could be corrected on this, but I don't think that there will be any changes coming out of this. Councilor Lee?
The statute allows for a public hearing to take place, or requires a public hearing to take place. This is that public hearing. The Joint Charter Commission, from my reading of the statute, is still permitted subsequent to that, but not as part of this hearing itself, to make adjustments to what they're ultimately going to be submitting to the voters. I mean, it could be based on anything.
Right. Yeah, right.
It has nothing, I mean, ostensibly, the theory is you have a public hearing, and they will be impacted by that public hearing in one way or the other. But there's nothing that requires any changes made to the joint charter be somehow indexed to comments that were made during the public hearing.
Right.
So I vision that this is probably going to be used for those people that are for the joint charter or against the joint charter to vent their feelings. And those statements will be in the media and played and replayed and used in campaign literature and such. But my impression was that it was a sounding board to have the Charter Commission make changes in it if there was some objection to it to make it more saleable.
I think they could if they chose to do that. They're not required to. Councilor Stone?
Yeah, the Section 2152 clearly says that the consolidation agreement that was submitted and which has the proposed charter as part of it can be amended. And so I agree with Councilor Lee that, who knows what they're going to do. Their only deadline is they've got to make the city clerk's deadline to for the ballot, which is, I believe, in early September. And either way, I look at a public hearing, and it may differ from everybody else here, is it's a chance for the public to make comments. And, this is a great opportunity for them to get up to the microphone and, just like in the old town meetings, say what they want to say, and pro or con. And they really should be, I believe, though, city residents. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but, I think this is a public, and I guess we have the opportunity to set the rules for the hearing. I don't know if you want to bring in people from other towns, for example, Lewiston, to make comments or whatever. But I would think it would be a crowded night in a crowded room that is being made available by the city council for citizen of Auburn input. And I have no treachery or anything about that. I just feel that if you're from Lewiston, you'll have a chance to make your comments on the matter in Lewiston. And if you're from Yarmouth, you really don't vote here. And I don't know what people think about that. And I don't know when we should be discussing that, at this workshop or?
Right now, I think it's.
Yeah, right now, I
The
think.
agenda,
Right now is a good time to
how it's
discuss.
going to work. Again, I agree that there should be an Auburn resident that speaks, at least first. And then if there's time at the end of the night where it's nothing going on, maybe we could allow others. But if Lewiston's going to have their own, then I think really we wouldn't have a problem with at least having Auburn residents that'd be a priority in speaking. Just.
Councilor Burns?
Just to the point that was just raised about who we ought to allow to speak at this, it's my understanding that up to this point, we have never really set any parameters around who we allow to speak at our meetings. If someone believes that they have a salient point to bring to an issue, we give them the venue to do that. I would be hesitant to try to limit the folks who have something that they want to make known to the residents of Auburn. If they believe that they have something important to say, I think it's a public setting, and I personally don't want to be in the business of censoring who is speaking at this event, and to let the discussion run its course. I think that would be the best way for us to do our service to the city to facilitate this process in as open and transparent a way as possible, and to let the citizens who are going to be voting on this hear from as many stakeholders as want to speak, give them the structure to do that, but not to limit the folks who would make their opinions known. I think it's dangerous for us to start to go down that road, and I think it sets a bad precedent for the council moving forward as we meet publicly right here at our meetings.
Councilor Lee?
Man, I love the First Amendment. It seems like it would be infinitely regressive for us to require people to somehow prove their residency in order to be able to speak at this event. This seems like a place where the marketplace of ideas will probably regulate that. If you had person after person after person after person coming up from one city that's not Auburn to make arguments in favor of the Joint Charter Commission, I think that would make a compelling argument as to the interest of people in the city of Auburn. So I think as a matter of theater and as a matter of speech, it probably wouldn't be a very useful thing for people who are in favor or against to be making arguments from another city or town. I don't think we should have any role in forcing it to be people of Auburn, because I don't know how we regulate that. I think it's perfectly legitimate for us to exercise our normal process that we use during open sessions and public hearings, that someone who comes to the microphone says where their address is. And that would allow us to have the same element of information. Someone doesn't want to share their address, you could make your inference from that.
Any other comments?
I had two other points.
Councilor Burns?
Thank you. So in terms of the hearing itself, I know at the last meeting where we discussed this, we talked about whether or not we wanted to have one big meeting or a long series of meetings. My understanding from the last meeting was that we wanted to have one big meeting and then evaluate whether or not it more public input was necessary. Do we, with this schedule, have the space in which we, as a council, can make the determination whether or not more public input is necessary in our estimation for this process to be fully borne out?
Well, you've raised a good question. I think we do. If you feel after the hearing that there should be more public input.
I'm not anticipating that we will need to. I do know it came up at the last meeting, so I just wanted to kind of just make sure that potential consideration was, because it is in our discretion, if I'm not wrong, as to whether or not, especially I can imagine a situation in which the Joint Charter Commission hears a lot of constructive input from this public meeting, and they make significant amendments to the proposed charter. We might see it as in the interest of the people of the city to have a second public meeting where they can, be made aware or discuss the charter that will end up being on the ballot. I just want to make sure we have the opportunity to have that option, knowing that it's unlikely that we'll need to exercise it. I just want to make sure that I had mentioned it.
Councilor Stone?
I just want to make myself clear. I think this is a public hearing. This is my opinion, and I respect yours, Councilor Lee and Councilor Burns. I believe this is a public hearing held by the City Council of the City of Auburn regarding a discussion about the future, the continued existence of the City of Auburn. And I believe that it should be that the speakers, the participants in this meeting should be residents of the City of Auburn, or in the case of somebody that owns a business in the City of Auburn, an owner of a business in the City of Auburn. I don't believe it's a time for other folks to be voicing their opinion at our, i.e. City of Auburn, public hearing. And that's my feeling. I want to be very clear on that. I want the citizens to hear that, because it's going to be a major issue if the citizens are sitting there waiting for an opportunity to speak while people that aren't even from the city, don't even pay taxes here, are speaking. So, that's the way I feel, and I just wanted to go on record quite clearly as to precisely where I feel.
Councilor Pross?
I would suspect that holding the public hearing in that fashion would prevent us from complying with the statute of having a public hearing, because what you're talking about is a hearing that's not in fact open to members of the public. You're talking about a hearing for residents with them, residents of the community, people who are domiciled in the community, pick a definition. But public hearing, if that's the language of the statute, would seem to, in its very meaning, preclude narrowing those who may attend or speak. And if we have to comply with the statute, then we're just making a bigger mess.
Councilor Lee?
As a matter of theory, I agree with you, Councilor Stone, that this should be a hearing that is for Auburn residents to provide their input. I'm simply saying, as a matter of reality, we don't have the tools to regulate that. And I think that the First Amendment, through the public hearing process, will regulate that.
Name and address. When you go up to...
Precisely, but that doesn't... that should be something that's evaluated by those hearing that discussion, rather than something where we're I don't know, pushing someone off of a microphone or silencing someone as a result of where they're residents.
Yeah, well, I'm very... I think it's very important that this doesn't become, a hearing where people come from hither and yon and make, statements.
I agree.
And where maybe our residents are not given an opportunity to speak, or are pushed back so late in the evening that basically they're outlasted. That you game the thing so that you know, they just give up and go home, and people give up and go home. That's a problem.
Councilor Young?
It would be interesting for those people that speak in favor or against articles in the joint charter and bring those up. And if there is any changes, it would also be interesting to know what the changes, if any, were made. If there was substantial amount of changes made, then there may be a need for another public hearing. If there is no changes made, then I would think there would be no additional need for another public hearing, unless you thought there wasn't sufficient amount of people who were able to enter the room and there's still comments to add. Now, can we also have comments in writing? Because we usually can have, there's a certain period that comments could be made in writing for those people that weren't able to be there. And where would those comments be sent? And where could people read those comments?
I would suggest that the comments be sent to the city clerk.
And they could be
Sue?
posted, or?
Yeah, Sue, do you have any comments on that?
No, I think that would make sense.
And there'd be a certain time which those comments, an open period, which those comments would be made, because obviously you'd have to cut it off at some point. And who would determine that? Is that in statute?
What do we typically do when we have a public hearing like that on written comments? Is there a timeline?
I don't think I've ever, publicized written comments are welcome.
We need to have them by a certain time to make a decision.
I would say right up until the public hearing. Unless
Well,
you have
it's usually a few days after the public hearing or whatever, I don't know. It's a certain window.
we can talk about that.
Councilor Burns?
Unrelated to Councilor Young's question and concern, I agree that we should have a time limit for speaking in order to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to speak and to keep a solid structure to the event. If we do set a limit that we would like people to speak, I would just recommend that we include that in the notice for public hearing so that we aren't catching members of the public flat-footed if they prepare testimony that may go significantly longer than that. I think it would be in our best interests for just the civility of the meeting to make sure that folks go into it knowing what the expectations are. And then I would just echo Councilor Pross's general point about the definition of a public meeting and wanting to make sure that this is something that both complies with statute and with the spirit of a healthy public debate.
Any other comments? What do councilors think about what Councilor Young was saying, who haven't spoken? Councilor Pross?
I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, I agree with the general point that we want to try to provide as much opportunity for public input as possible. I don't see any harm in opening it up necessarily to public written input, but there's another part of me that says, well, if you care, then just show up at the meeting, because then are we discouraging participation at the public hearing if people know that they can just send an email to the city clerk? And doesn't it say more about your willingness to participate in the public discourse if you're not just dropping a quick 5-minute text to, talk to text email to the city clerk and consider it good?
Any other comments? Councilor Lee?
It's a little awkward because the decision maker for this public hearing isn't the city council. The decision maker, in some respects, is the Joint Charter Commission, who could potentially make amendments, as well as the general public. So when it comes to written comments, I don't know if it's necessarily the city's responsibility to take those in and make them readily available, but perhaps the Joint Charter Commission's responsibility if they wanted to take written comments afterwards. So, it's awkward because if this were a public hearing in which the city council was making a decision, it would make absolute sense for those comments to go to the city clerk, but I don't know if it makes sense here.
I would agree. Councilor Stone?
You would think that they always have the option to email the Joint Charter Commission with any comments they want to make, and I'm sure they're doing that. So I agree with Councilor Pross in that I think it may limit the attendance. People will just take the easy, well, it may be the only way they have. If they're going to be out of town, obviously they can't be testifying. But so, I think we shouldn't allow written comments, allow public only, and leave it at that.
Councilor Burns?
Thank you. I would generally agree with what's been said regarding to whom those written comments should be directed. If the JCC, it's my assumption that they already have some sort of format in which people can submit written comments to them. If that is something that we wanted to include in terms of our own notice, I'm not sure if we even need to go that far, but certainly if members of the public can't make it to the public meeting, but they want to convey something to the Joint Charter Commission, and there's a way that the Joint Charter Commission has already established to do that, we might want to make sure that Auburn citizens are aware of that option, but I don't think that it really needs to be part of this specific process. And it sounds like we don't really have a well-established mechanism within the city to do it. So I would encourage us, if we want to encourage in turn our citizens to give written statements, to direct them toward the JCC.
So we won't have any measurable way of knowing whether we need to have another hearing to help the Joint Charter Commission fine-tune their presentation, because we won't be aware if there was any written comments. I'm all in favor of having it go to them, but we won't know what those comments were or whether there were any comments unless they share that information with us.
Councilor Burns?
I would just, my general thinking, and if other councilors have other or conflicting opinions of this, feel free to voice them, but my thinking is that the only time in which we would find it necessary to have a second public hearing is if the Joint Charter Commission made significant amendments to the Joint Charter itself. Yeah. So certainly if they amend, we'll know that something was conveyed to them, or they felt the need to change what they're presenting to the members of the public. And I think at that point, if that to me would be the trigger for us to say whether or not we need to have another round of public input. I don't see anything short of that would, at least in my own mind, compel me to want to have a second meeting.
Very quick, Mr. Manager. Joint Charters Commission is, they're charged with submitting a draft. They're charged with submitting a consolidation agreement. And there's very clear language as to what is going to be in that consolidation, has to be in that consolidation agreement. They've submitted a draft, they've submitted a proposed charter. If they want to make changes, up until the point where Sue says, that's it, I can't take any more, then, it's up to them. I don't think, we have no role other than to hold a public hearing. That's it. And set a date.
Any other comments? Everyone okay with what we talked about?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. Want to bring the workshop to a close?
That we're going to have time for one of the executive sessions.
Good.
Nope.
All right. Thank you very much.
Take a 5-minute recess.
5-minute recess. Sounds like a good idea.
One of the problems
I would move that we appoint Councilor Young as our mayor pro tem in the absence of Mayor Labonte this evening.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Unanimous consent.
You are elected.
Okay.
And the gavel is yours.
It was awkward when you don't have the person to convene the meeting. You have to.
All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Call us to order. Under consent items, these are considered routine. How's the council wish to handle this?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I would like to make a motion to remove item 2, Order 63-07172017, setting the date for a special municipal referendum election for the proposed consolidation for November 7th, 2017, from the consent agenda to make it its own item on our business.
Does this have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? You ready to vote?
If I could speak to my motion, if I
Yes,
could.
you may.
Thank you.
Speak.
Thank you very much. I know that we had a discussion about this issue, and I just would like to bring it up one last time. Voter turnout in these off-year elections is very low, and I think that it's really worthy of our council to consider setting the date for an off-year election with historically low voter turnout. Now, that obviously the flip side of that coin is that more people could show up and vote for city councilors of their choice in the off-year election because of this item. I just want to make sure that we've had the opportunity to have that discussion. We only have 2 levers that we have any control over in this whole process. That's setting the public hearing, which we've pretty much just done for July 31st in our workshop, and then setting the date for the vote on the referendum. The city of Lewiston may decide to set it for November 7th, 2017. And imagine, we haven't talked about the possibility if they did that and we set it for 2018, that would put the decision, and if we knew how Lewiston voted and a majority in Lewiston voted for it, it would put the decision entirely in the hands of the Auburn voters in 2018. I didn't even consider that until after talking about it as a body last week at our meeting. So I wanted to bring it up once again and thought that we might be able to take it off of the consent agenda and discuss it as an item.
And the second?
I got a second.
No, did you have anything to say in favor of the motion?
I did not. I just want to give Councilor Prost the opportunity to state the reason for his motion.
Is this something we go to the public? No, okay. You ready to vote? All those in favor of removing it from the consent agenda? All those opposed? Okay, I didn't see my other side here, but was it 6-1?
Yes.
1-6? Okay, so we're back to the original motion.
We don't have an original motion, actually. I'd move order 6207172017.
Consent agenda?
Yes.
Is that a second?
Second.
Any discussion? No.
I have a point of order. I'm looking at these 2 numbers. Okay, I'm sorry. I withdraw my question.
Oh, okay. You ready to vote? All those in favor? Hands down, it's passed. Okay, minutes, do we have a motion approval of the minutes?
Motion to accept the minutes.
Second.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
As a matter of discussion,
Yes.
I think we had listed that we'll be looking at the June 19th minutes on our agenda here, and I don't think so. I think it was July 10th is what's in our packet.
Okay.
So I think we need to correct the agenda that we're voting on July 10th minutes.
Yep.
Is that correct?
That'll be correct, yes,
So the
exactly.
minutes we can approve, but the agenda we need to change.
I would assume that we can still vote for July 10th, which was in our packet, so we can amend the motion, or do we just,
If it's required to, I would withdraw my motion and resubmit my motion to accept the minutes that are in our packet for July.
And the second, the same?
Second, same.
Okay.
more discussion?
Yes.
I'd like to make one observation in the July 10th minutes, when it talked at the very beginning about Mayor Levante called the meeting to order at 7 p.m., Councilor Chambers at Auburn Hall, and led by Assembly to salute the flag, and then Councilor Young had an excused absence. I believe it was Councilor Titus that had the excused absence last week.
I'll make the
I
correction,
remember because I
yes.
was there.
Yeah.
Well, no, you weren't.
Well, I wasn't there, yeah.
He wasn't there. You knew
So I
where-
just want to make that clear,
you
because I
were-
don't want
you were
Councilor Young to
someplace
be
else.
in trouble for not being there when he was.
Well, as long as I was excused, I think that's all right
Absolutely. So, other than that change, I would be okay with voting
for those amendments.
for the minutes.
All those in favor? 7.
Most controversial minutes we've had.
And the mayor is excused. Okay. Communications, presentations, recognition, there is none tonight. Brings it down to open session. Any takers? No? Guess everybody's contented. No unfinished business. No new business. Mayor's report. Council reports. Start on my right. Ward 1.
I will just report that we had a school committee meeting last week where we further explored the topic of the committee that will be established that I reported on last week with regard to professional development days for the middle school and high school teachers. The committee is going to go forward. If you're interested in participating, you want to reach out to the school department. It looks like they're going to be assembled sometime before the end of July. As a membership, at least that was the goal that was stated, but the goal of the committee is to report by November 1st, not March, as we had previously discussed and as I related at our meeting last week. So the idea is still to have an inclusive committee. There will be a public hearing that will be set by the committee to take in the input of the public and different stakeholders on that issue of sending kids home early on Wednesdays or whatever day may be determined, or sending them to school later so that teachers can have built-in professional development time into their school day. So the school committee is looking at the various impacts of that change in the school calendar and how it could affect families and staff, and the value of having that time for professional development is something that we've been talking about for months. So something that needs to happen. The question at hand is, how do we make it happen, and who's going to pay for it? Will it be taxpayers by paying more to teachers in subsequent union contracts? Will it be families who have unattended children at home? Will it be children losing instructional time from school? Or can there be a solution that provides adequate benefits and costs spread evenly to all the stakeholders? That's what we'll be charged with as a committee. And if you're interested in participating in that, if you have an interest in that topic, please contact the school department. You can contact me, and I'd be happy to take your name back to the school department for inclusion in the committee. My city email address will work perfectly, so let us know.
Next ward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I just wanted to remark on the effectiveness of a couple of our city departments here. I was headed over to the golf course on, I believe, Friday morning, and I came around the corner out by Hotel Road where the railroad bridge was, and there was you couldn't really tell what was going on, but there was a very intense fire right on that curve by Whited Ford, and it was quite spectacular, and traffic was backed up, and so I turned around as everybody else was, and I diverted around, went down Rodman Road, and was promptly rammed in the rear end by a motorist, and so I had to call 911. In the middle of all of what was going on Hotel Road, some guy runs into me, and I mean, the response was fantastic. The police were there, the fire department was there, because there was a little puddle of leaking fluids, but I just was amazed at how they could just keep it all together. Because that was really, as one of the firemen described it in the paper, a once-in-a-lifetime fire over there where rock was being melted. So, again, kudos to the Auburn Fire, Auburn Police, and 911. Did a great job to, you know, because I couldn't hear beans with all the traffic that was going on Rodman and Washington. So that was my only report. They do, our public servants do a fantastic job.
Councilor Titus?
I just got a few things. Tomorrow night will be the monthly meeting for the Auburn Sewer District. It's at 4 o'clock at the district itself, and anybody is welcome to attend. There is a public hearing, a session, open session as well as all these meetings. And then Wednesday is the Auburn Water District meeting at the same time at 4 o'clock. And then we'll be meeting shortly thereafter to talk about some reporting numbers and how what numbers we review at each meeting, because we want to make sure what we're looking at really makes sense. So that'll be kind of important. And then on August 1st, the Sunderland Drive Neighborhood Watch meeting will be at Sam's on Court Street. That's at 6 o'clock, so anybody's welcome to come to that, but more importantly, anybody in the Sunderland Drive neighborhood. And I'm sure there'll be more interesting plans going forward to improve that neighborhood, the safety and all that kind of thing. So besides that, that's all I had.
Thank you. And I'll report that next Sunday, this coming Sunday actually, I'll be running the Emily's Run, and Councilor Pross, will you be joining me? Councilor Pross?
Sorry, sir.
Emily's Run?
I'm going to be out of town.
Oh, no.
Sorry.
I guess I got you beat then.
Yes, you did.
Yeah.
This year.
Well, probably the mayor will be there. I'll try to keep up with him if I can. I'm down a photographer. My friend Don Penter for Wyndham broke his leg, so I'll be on the email trying to get a replacement for him. I think I probably will be able to, but we'll see.
I have no report other than I'll take a photograph of Councilor Young as I pass him.
I'd just like to report on July 25th will be a Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Rolly's Diner, the United New Auburn Association will meet, and our city manager is supposed to be there that evening to speak for us. On the 27th of July at 6:30, we will be at the 6th Street Congregational Church, and that's a neighborhood watch put on by the Auburn Police Department. And I also would like you to know that for Ward 5, I took out my paperwork. The paperwork has been returned, and it's been certified that I got a clearance to run again for Ward 5 councilman. So I'll be running for this position for another 2 years.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. This last Saturday was the Maine Shrine Lobster Bowl. This year, Edward Little sent down one player who was elected to be one of the co-captains of the East squad in a statewide all-star game. Tyler Blanchard, a wide receiver, represented us very well during the game in a hard-fought loss against the Western team. But I just want to congratulate both Tyler and all the players who played in that game for a great cause, as well as all the Auburn residents who went down to support our players and the good work of the Shriners down at Thornton Academy last weekend.
Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes.
may I make one amendment to my report?
Yes, you may.
I also had the pleasure of announcing several games at the Under-13 Babe Ruth Tournament at Auburn Suburban Little League, where Auburn was competing themselves. They made it to the finals, but lost in the finals to Tri-County. Great team, great fun, great event, actually, for the entire city to have those teams come and join us in our city and enjoy the fields.
Thank you. City Manager?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize the latest addition to the City of Auburn team. Our new Assistant City Manager, Denise Clavette, is here. Denise has most recently been the Economic Development Director for the town of Yarmouth, also was Economic Development Director for the town of Brunswick, and was the Director for Parks and Recreation for the city of Portland for a number of years, and also headed up the Kennebunk Chamber of Commerce, and has distinguished herself in each of those positions. We're happy to have her on board. This is her first day, and we've had an interesting day, as they all seem to be, for the city of Auburn. And I want to also recognize John Bouvier again for his involvement. John has done a lot of heavy lifting since he's been here as the acting city manager, the acting assistant city manager, and I know you all appreciate what he's done. And he'll be here for a while longer during the transition period. And thank you, John, for all of your work. And lastly, I just want to mention the school building committee is meeting tomorrow evening, so I'll be attending that meeting. I've gone to 2 of them so far. It's very interesting. Council Burns also attends those meetings, so that's a very important and I think critical issue for the city. So happy to be participating in that process. Thank you.
Thank you. Second open session. Would anybody like to come up and speak? Nothing to say?
Quiet bunch.
Oh, quiet bunch. Close the second open session. Do we have a, yes, Councilor Stone?
You want a motion on the executive
Yes,
session?
I do.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that we move to enter executive session for the discussion regarding economic development pursuant to 1 MRSA Section 405-6C.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor? 7. No dissenters.
I think we ought to borrow the 200,000 from some.
Okay, I'll declare us out of executive session.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I make a motion that we go into executive session to discuss labor negotiations pursuant to Title I, MRSA Section 405, sub 6D.
Second.
We have a second? Okay, all those in favor? Declare us back into executive session. We'll be back.
Pro Tem, he knows what do we have a quorum?
Declare us out of executive session.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I move we adjourn.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor?
We're adjourned?
We're adjourned.
It's